you to identify yourself before asking your question, and would appreciate it if you stick to questions rather than lengthy statements of your own. We have a chance to capitalize on the great experience that Honorable Mr. Vincent Siew brings to this topic, and we ought to take advantage of that by putting questions to him. Who wishes to be first? Yes. They'll bring you a microphone.
Oh, okay. I just had a quick question. Thank you. Well, first, thank you for making a very interesting speech, and I learned a lot about the Taiwanese position on cross-strait relations. My question is simply this. You claim that Taiwan is developing a localized Taiwanese identity. If that's the case, when do you think it will be the case that Taiwan will stop claiming that the Senkaku Islands and the Spratly Islands are Chinese territory? And the second question is, when do you think that Taiwan will stop claiming that Tibet is part of China? Because the Taiwanese constitution itself says that Tibet is part of China.
The question is, if Taiwan is developing its own identity, when will it cease claiming Senkaku Islands
And the Spratly Islands.
and Spratly Islands as part of its territory?
Well, I think it's not the new emerging so-called Taiwan identity is certainly not, to my understanding. Of course, it was a kind of a trend that has been, or terminology that has been created by the politicians during the election campaign. But my feeling is this kind of awareness is more sentimental rather than political. So in that case, this kind of a Taiwan identity should not be well interpreted as a kind of a movement of Taiwan independence. So that is my interpretation of this Taiwan identity.
What about Tibet?
Sorry?
Tibet, are you going to drop claim that Tibet is part of China in the Taiwanese constitution?
In the Constitution.
Yes, your constitution states very clearly that Tibet is part of China. Are you going to drop claim, or is Taiwan eventually going to drop claim to that?
The question is if in the process of rewriting a constitution, will claims to other territory, in this case Tibet, be dropped from the
I followed the statement of the Judge Ramon in his interview with many foreign correspondents, including Washington Post and the BBC and the Japanese newspaper. He has been, from time to time, where said clearly that in the forthcoming his proposal for the constitutional reform, there will be no question of so-called the change of territory. No question. There will be no question of so-called change of the name, the Republic of China's name. And then there is also no question of the change of the national flags as well as the territory, because he has said clearly that the Article 4 of our Constitution, which were of course clearly about the territory, will not be touched, will not be changed.
Next question. Yes.
I generally agree with.
Maybe we could have you say your name.
My name is John Lu. I'm a U.S. citizen, but with strong Chinese background. I have followed the development of China and furthest from Second World War up to now. So the most important case here is the role of United States. Because China will never give up the claim on Taiwan. But they know, as Mao Zedong said, they will never fight a war without confidence to win. And they cannot fight the US, it's clear. So the US role here will play a very important consequence. The reference relationship with Taiwan the fact has proven Taiwan, China has been peaceful because of what? Because it's a reference relationship. The US made it clear, if China attack Taiwan, US will go to hell. China will never fight a war without sure to win. So that have the peace. Secondly, but US had, in some cases, has hesitated to make clear. The US doesn't want the Taiwan, China to have fight. So the best way is to have the US say clearly, don't try to invade Taiwan force, use force. On the other hand, tell the country not to challenge, not to provoke, make any provoke actions. But US sometimes hesitate. They don't give wrong misunderstanding. So if US take a very strong standard, and I think your prediction may come true, that Taiwan will be peaceful.
Thank you. I do agree with you completely what you have said. And I know that the US law in the future cross relation is very vital. Very vital. And as the US government has said from time to time that the US interest is to see that this status quo in Taiwan will not be changed. So with that, of course, the best interest of both sides is that Taiwan should not do anything to provoke Beijing, and we will be lead to the so-called misunderstanding of Taiwan independence. There will be no independence for Taiwan, and also no force from China. So if that could be maintained, I think the peace and the stability of the region will be preserved.
Welcome, Mr. Xiao, to visit the United States, particularly in the Bay Area. I hope you have a good stay here. I'm very encouraged and thankful after hearing your speech. I do hope Taiwan government will send more leaders like you come to the United States, give a fair talk to present the true and good story to American people, including myself. For that, I want to thank you very much. I have two questions. Number one, last year, before you accept President Chen's invitation as a coordinator for financial and economic development, it took you a while, but finally you accept that. From reading some of the articles, I wasn't clear based upon what criteria finally you accept that position. That's question number one. Question number two, you mentioned to many people's surprise the outcome of this March 20th election. So I'd like to ask you, if you could tell me individually, fine, if not, to what surprise, to what group of people who thought the outcome would be different. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, I must say, I'm coming to visit friends, and of course, for this occasion, I'm very honored to be invited by my good friend, Ambassador Amtos, to be here to meet all of you. So I'm not coming on behalf of anybody, any capacity other than my own. So I have to make it clear, I don't speak for government or my party, KMT, or for any others. Secondly, I'm pleased that you could raise the question of my role in Taiwan. That 9 months ago, when I accepted the invitation from the Chen Shui-bian, President Chen, to be his so-called chief economic advisor. You know, you can recall during that time, Taiwan was suffered from the SARS very bitterly, to the extent that we had suffered a 3% minus 3% economic growth on that particular quarter, the second quarter of 2003. The people in Taiwan were so concerned and so worried about the future of Taiwan economy. But many of our businessmen came to see me. And they asked me to come out and help them and help the government find a way to recover our economy. So then I promised to come up on the condition that this will be purely, totally for the people, for country, not for any political party, not for any political purpose. And then the other condition that I said is that the government, including Chen Shui-bian, must promise to take our recommendation seriously and implement it immediately. Otherwise, it will be very too late for our economy to rebound. So fortunately, because of that, we are happy that the opposed, along with the whole worldwide and particularly the American economies rebound. So our economy also pick up quickly last year, that we have managed to have our growth rate of more than 3.3%. And all the indicators show that the confidence has been restored in Taiwan in the last few months. So we were very happy to see that our recommendations, that is not my own, it's a recommendation from all the think tanks, economic think tanks, 3 major economic think tanks in Taiwan. They come out and we all work together to submit a proposal to the government for their action. The second question is that we're opposed with a very, we call very small margin of that election vote. Well, I must say it is certainly it is natural and also is rational for Panmu to solicit the judicial process for a recount. And I think that process is now on the way. I hope that kind of recounts, the recounts report can be available as soon as possible. If that is clear, and with other kind of requests from Panmu camp to have that gunshot or assassination attempts investigation be made transparent, I'm sure all the dark clouds in Taiwan society will be cleared out soon.
Can I just follow up quickly on the first question? I really applaud Mr. Xiao's accomplishment. Really, he's a true model of the bipartisan. I know everybody know, I know he's a KMT member, but the ruling party in Taiwan is the Democratic Progressive Party, ETTV. So not regarding the party, so he put his effort for the sake of Taiwan, for the sake of people in Taiwan. For that, I really would applaud you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very kind of you.
Down here in the front, Jim.
My name is George Koo, and I'm an American citizen, not from Taiwan. But you raised a very, Mr. Xiao, you raised a very interesting point that the two sides should be sitting down to talk under if I remember, hear you correctly, an international general framework. My question is that it seems to me, from my observation, Beijing's distrust of Chen Shui-bian runs very, very deep. And I'm just wondering what concrete steps you would suggest that could bring the two sides to a point where they could confidently sit down and talk. And would you be a possible emissary for that effort?
No, I don't think I'm a possible emissary, but I have commit myself after I retire from government, and I want to devote all my life to promote a better relation between the two sides. That's why 3 years ago in Taipei, I have talked with my private sector people, and they all encouraged me to form a private and non-profit organization called Cross-Strait Common Market Foundation to promote these kind of relations. And our foundation is the only one founding member of our Forum for Asia. So in that capacity, I visited Boao last year, and I'm going to Boao at the end of this month to attend that annual convention. And I know that because of this mistrust between the two leaders of the two sides, it is very difficult for both sides to sit down and talk. But I must say, if we can find something which is commonly interest topic, like topic of tradings, which is mutually beneficial and which will be a win-win strategy for both sides, why not just sit down and talk? How can we start and establish these tradings as soon as possible? And I've been trying very hard to see, convince our people, be more flexible and more pragmatic. I hope that will be serve as a first step for both sides to build up a better understanding and better trust between the two sides. Thank you.
Hi, my name's David. I'm a sophomore at Harvard. My question is, recently, investment in mainland China has become increasingly more significant as a total proportion of foreign investment from Taiwanese private sector. And I was wondering how this trend may affect whether the politicians in Taiwan will go towards more political cooperation with the politicians in Beijing, or at least lessen the direct antagonism. Do you see this as a possibility due to this trend?
Well, yes. I must say that economic relation between the two sides has never been affected greatly by the political confrontation across the strait. So because of that, we see the increasing investment in trade of Taiwan in China. And I must say, it is a very heavy tendency or trend that the Taiwan and China cross-strait, the economic relation become so close that even these kind of political differences were not in any way undermine this kind of relation, close economic ties. So I wish and I hope, I believe that this will serve as a very, very effective means to improve the relation between the two sides and pave the way for eventual or everlasting peace and stability in the region.
In order to diversify the question, the people ask question, I will say I came from Beijing. So I have two related questions. First one is sometimes I understand why the people in Taiwan they need to Taiwan independence. I know there are several questions, but I don't know which one is the most important. First one, people in Taiwan don't believe the central government in Beijing is a good government. They don't respect human rights. They don't have no freedom of speech. They don't have election. That's the first reason. The second reason, people hate the Chinese culture. They hate people in China. They don't want to belong part of it. And third question, some politicians, they want to take advantage of people who want to independence so they can be elected. Okay, maybe it's good I translate my question to Chinese. 我想就是我从大陆来的我想呢，为什么那个台湾人主张独立，可能会有3个原因。第一个原因，他们不相信北京政府，他们认为北京政府是个邪恶的政府，他们不尊重法治，他们没有民主选举，这是第一个原因。第二个原因台湾人讨厌大陆，他们觉得大陆文化很讨厌，历史很讨厌，所以他们不愿意作为大陆的一部分。第3个原因，有一些政治人物想利用这种情况想当总统。那么我想问你，就是哪个原因你认为是最主要的？ And a related question is, suppose that in the future China become a good and open government, we have rule of law, we have election, we respect human rights, and are the Taiwanese still want independence? If they still want, why? 一个相应的问题就是，如果有一天大陆政府变成好政府了，那么是不是台湾人还愿意要独立？那么如果愿意，它原因是什么 ？Thank you very much.
I must say, I don't think the Taiwanese people are hostile against Chinese on mainland. No, I think that was the wrong impression. We people in Taiwan, now you can, I'm sure a lot of people knows that how many investors now from Taiwan living in China. There are about 500,000 people now living in China. And aside from that, we have about every year 3.5 million people from Taiwan visit China. So if the Taiwanese people hate China, I don't think there would be so many people going to China and spend money there and investment in there. No, I think that was the wrong observation. But I must say, you you are right to say that the system, the different system, in terms of political, economic, and social structure, really give the people in Taiwan the belief that for the moment, it is still not the time, not the right time to talk about so-called reunification or independence. It is to the best interest of Taiwan to leave all these questions option for future. Because nobody knows in 20 or 30 years later, both Taiwan and China with those very peaceful rise or the development of the both sides. Probably all the gap between the two sides will be narrow. And the people of Taiwan may not rule out the possibility of asking for reunification. So this are still too early to say that, but I must say, with the very close exchange or interaction of political culture and social activities between the two sides, I think the people of both sides understand much better now than before. Understand each other. So the only difference is on political stance, which needs more time and wisdom for the political leaders of both sides to address.
Okay.
This is Fu Mingwang. I am a citizen of Taiwan, so you finally hear the voice of Taiwan. And I also a graduate, a PhD student at Stanford, so welcome to Stanford University. It's very nice to see you here. And the first question, I would like to hear your perspective about Taiwan's future and how to make Taiwan's future better. And it's very important to see, I agree with you that it's very important to see China and Taiwan can sit and talk. However, it's quite impossible because if Taiwan government wants to be independent and China government doesn't allow Taiwan to be independent, how could these two governments sit and talk? And the second question, I know it's your private visit at Stanford University, but you still are vice chairman of KMT, and I would like to know what's your perspective about KMT's future? Thanks.
I think that if you ask me what's the future of Taiwan, I must say that Taiwan is where the Taiwan has been developed into a more and more deepening of democracy. We would hope in future with the people attach more importance on so-called native identity. I'm sure the Taiwan democracy will be further consolidated. Secondly, Taiwan as a major player in the international economic community, the Taiwan will continue to commit itself to be globalized in our economic policy. And so Taiwan will become more open and more free market to others. Certainly, and the rest, I think the Taiwan people in future, through this process of the operation of this so-called democracy, the future of the Taiwan will be they can decide their own destiny or own future. I think what we can do now in Taiwan is try to do more to consolidate our democracy and to reinvigorate our economy, and also to build up the so-called social harmony and unity in the future. With this, Taiwan will become will play a very important role in the region and as a very stable force in the region.
Sir, I'm from Beijing. Very interesting to meet you here. You are still a vice chairman of KMT, and I know that the current situation of KMT in Taiwan is not that pleasant now. So how can you have the good mood come to US? Thanks.
Why don't you move to the
I must say I'm always in good mood. I have in my past, over 30 years of working in the government as a public servant. I've been dealing with all kinds of crises in Taiwan before, and I never be frustrated. And I always with a good mood to overcome, to manage the crisis and become more and more confident.
Why don't we take three more?
Hello, Mr. Xiao. I'm a freshman from Peking University, and my name is Wu Haiben. And it's nice to meet you. And I have a little question. Among the older generation in Taiwan, many of them were born in mainland, and they naturally consider themselves as mainland, and just they consider mainland as their motherland. But now the younger generation are not learning enough history about mainland, and it's a worrying situation. What's your opinion? Do you think that the younger generation will love them and lose their love for mainland? And, and do you think, since they were born and brought up in Taiwan? And the second question is, I appreciate that you said first and foremost the leaders of the two sides should sit down and negotiate. And do you have the confidence that both the leaders of the both sides will sit down and negotiate in the near future? Thank you.
But I do appreciate the fact that in Taiwan, the younger generation becomes more and more dynamic and very much involved not only in the economic business circle, they are also more and more interested in politics. So this is a very interesting phenomenon that our party, KMT, has to pay more attention. I have within our party's meeting I have urged our so-called core leaders of KMT to give away opportunities to the young people and attract more young people to join the KMT, because if you look at the comparing the strengths of the two camps, you will see that they support in Pambu. And every 4 years, when you elect a new president, there will be 4 young people from 16 years old who will be eligible to cut their post 4 years later. So if you don't pay attention to the younger people's wishes and don't attract more younger people to join your party will have no chance to win back the election. So this is why I do appreciate your point that the young people in Taiwan should be given more opportunity, not only in the job opportunity, but also in the political career. Your second question?
Do you have the confidence that the leaders of the two sides would sit down and negotiate in the near future?
The negotiation. Well, I must say, since I'm already not very much involved in the government's operation, so what I can do is that I teach. Now I'm teaching in university, National Zhenjiang University. So I always give the lessons to our students on what I did in the past when I negotiated with the U.S. On trade issues only. But of course, my experiences will be very much interest to our young people and students. But in future, I don't know where that give the younger people to do more. So I will be happy to share my experiences with them.
I just speak loud, okay, so it takes some time. My name is Lee, Lester Lee. I'm an old Stanford graduate. I'm a Chinese, and I'm a Chinese American, okay. But I just want to follow up your comment about the younger generation. Yesterday or the past weekend, we had a lot of discussions about cross-strait relations in the community. And one of the things that some people brought it up, I thought was kind of interesting, is the fact that in addition to all the missiles pointed against Taiwan, and what's China worried about? In other words, everybody thinks that China has all the advantages in time, but there was a concern that there's a lot of movement in the identification of Taiwan, in such a manner that they wanted to be considered as local people rather than part of the Chinese people. And that this was verified by some of the people saying, even in America, there are people trying to identify themselves as Taiwanese American, not Chinese American. And in Taiwan, that this kind of movement would eventually identify themselves as a separate and totally away from the Chinese. I think this is identity crisis. The other crisis that's facing China right now, which is brought up by some of the people, is the fact that there's a lot of encouragement in speaking local dialect in Taiwan. And the speaking of the dialect is only part of the reason for changing the educational material in Taiwan to separate from China, the so-called anti-China movement. And for those two questions, I would like to see how you would respond and to see what it's going to be, because China is under pressure to resolve this issue because they fear for this two problem. Thank you.
I must say, well, Taiwan, before 2000 years, there's no question of that. During our administration, we appreciate the fact that Taiwan is a diversified society, that the people from different provinces or different ethnic, they speak their different dialect, but we have a common languages, Mandarin, which is a national language. So with this national language, and then we can communicate each other, in spite of the fact that at home you may speak your own dialect, or in the countryside you may talk with the people in the rural areas in their own dialect. But we have a common language of Mandarin to be taught in the school and practice in everything. There was no question of that. But after 2000 years, with the change of the government, where I was also very much concerned about this. I am not in favor of that policy. I think after the war in Taiwan, we get along harmoniously and peacefully. We don't have that kind of questions. So what you say really also make me very unhappy about it. But what I think people knows that it is not to the interest of the society, Taiwan society, to exclude, to ignore the so-called Chinese culture's influences. Because afterward, this cultural influence is now political. And we have 1,000 years of history and culture that is being valued by all people. So why should we ignore that? This is the point that I think not only me, myself, I know that a lot of people, they are not happy about this policy. So it should be adjusted or modified to become more open. Otherwise, it will be, I'm sure it will be opposed by the people.
This may be the last question.
Okay, I have a question. Let's suppose that it is possible that Beijing and Taiwan can negotiate, and I just want to ask a simple question. What is, from a personal view, what is the bottom line in this kind of negotiation? I mean, is it possible that under a very specific and certain condition that Taiwan may admit the unification of mainland China and Taiwan? Is that possible? For example, like China only wants a nominal unification and leaves a huge independence for Taiwanese. Is that possible that under certain condition the Taiwanese will admit the unification? That's my question.
I think there's such a huge gap or differences between the two sides in terms of political system and economic development. I think it is natural to see that both sides cannot sit down and talk on political agendas of reunification. But I'm of the opinion that since we are sharing the same culture, and we also have the same kind of a historical background, particularly we have the common interest of economic integration, there's no reason why we cannot sit down and talk from a very practical approach on the issues of economic integration first. With this, gradually both sides can change and they will accommodate each other and also understanding and build up a mutual understanding atmosphere that I think one day, not in my lifetime, I can probably my second or my granddaughters or maybe one day probably we will be getting together politically. But if you look at this European example or model as a case, 50 years ago, when after the end of Second World War, the people in Germany and the French, can they imagine that now they already merged together and they already unite together? Why? Politically, Germany is Germany, France is France, but economically, they are using the same currency, euro, and they have become one unit. So that is the way I dream. I hope that dream can come true in one day.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your pertinent questions. And thank you again, Vincent, for very direct answers and very thoughtful speaking.